I asked the organizers to give you a glass of Cooum water during the break. Invariably, the water in that bubble top was from the Cooum. But don't puke. I'll let you into a secret. This is not the first time that you are drinking Cooum water in your life. We are in a very historic place today, the Pantheon, an Athenian name for a colonial building. This was the entertainment hub for the East India Company officials. Their balls, their races, their sword fights, everything was held here. It's on a road named after this called the Pantheon Road, which has a river called the Cooum on either side. Very rare to have the same river on two sides of a road. The Cooum is now a cesspool, but on its banks, historical events have been frequently happening. A few hundred yards to the north, a Burmese princess was born on the same road. She was born in the Child and Women Hospital on Egmore, and the hospital was designed by a doctor and not an architect. So he designed it like a woman's pelvis. A few yards to the south, across the river in Doughton House, WCC, we had Tipu Sultan's sons being held hostage, not exile, hostage, so that Tipu Sultan would behave well after he had lost the Anglo-Mysore wars. This was poetic justice for the British because they had been thoroughly thrashed by Tipu Sultan on the same river bank a few miles ahead. This was the only battle in which the Indians had decisively beaten the East India Company. Where we are is, of course, the museum, but not many of us know that there was a zoological garden around this for some time. And once again, the zoo was not started by an expert on those subjects, but by a surgeon. The zoo was shifted from here to another place because the neighbors complained on the untimely roars and the unbearable smells. And it was moved to another place, also on the Cooum, the People's Park. But it was not a fortunate place at all because during the World War II, the Malabar police were called in and the entire zoo was shot. All the animals were shot because the corporation feared a Japanese bomb would set them free during the wartime. The Cooum is 72 kilometers long and has a lot of historical events, and it has not been a cesspool for a long time. It was a very clear water, and we had freshwater loving crocodiles and 40 species of fishes in the same river. This crocodile, incidentally, is in the same plot, but don't fear because it's 200 years old, has been stuffed with cotton and mounted on the wall of the museum. The Cooum is dirty, a fact that we are all responsible for. But historical events dot its banks. Warfields, museums, colleges, graveyards, whatnot. This particular piece of stone is an axe made 2 million years back. It was discovered between the Cooum and the Adayar rivers and is housed in the museum behind us. This pushes the inhabitation levels of Madras to 2 million years. The Cooum was responsible for that. Madras was an inconsequential little seaport on the mouth of the Cooum. It became the catalyst of an empire-building exercise on a scale that you have never seen before. A joint stock company becoming the biggest landowner in the world, in the history of the world. It happened. It started in Madras. The British were actually the last in Madras when you compare the other colonial powers. Most of the others had been here and they built their forts. The coincidence was every fort was on the northern bank of where a river joins the sea. Take, for instance, Pulicat, Santhom, Cedras, Nagapatnam, Porto Novo, Pondicherry, all of them. Only the Cooum was vacant. The British came last, and 3 of them were responsible for choosing this spot. Francis Day, Cogan, and an Indian called Nagapattan. Nagapattan was a gunpowder maker. So they chose this spot on Port St. George, and there was a rumor prevailing even then that Francis Day had a girlfriend, a half-Portuguese girlfriend in Santhom, whom he wanted to date frequently. That's why he chose this place. But the point was, there were too many negativities with this land, which was felt till a port was built. There was a huge sandbar next to the beach, perhaps because of the silt that the Cooum had thrust into the sea. This stopped any ship coming less than 2 kilometers to the port. So in later years, when elephants were imported from Thailand and Pegu, they were pushed into the sea and made to swim for the last 2 kilometers to come into Madras. Even this petite mem sahibs had to be carried into shore by those dark coolies. The Cooum has been mentioned in many texts throughout the world. This is a German encyclopedia, a lexicon, which calls Madras a quaint little city, which is bisected by a dirty little river called Cooum in 1850. So we don't have to feel responsible or guilty that the Cooum is dirty today. It's been there for long. The Vatican uses the Cooum to bifurcate Madras into two dioceses, Madras and Mylapore. Mylapore is the east and Madras is the west. Churches were exchanged with a lot of heartburn. This is the last church which came to the Mylapore diocese. Then, not very long back, the states were reorganized on linguistic basis. The Telugus wanted the whole of Madras to be the capital of the Andhra. And finally, they came to a compromise saying that we'll take half of it. That north of the Cooum will be the capital of Andhra, that south of Cooum will be the capital of Tamil Nadu. But a lot of historical factors in that time pushed the case towards the favor of Tamil Nadu. History does not create jobs. The world looks very much far into the future, and you need an excuse to learn history. For example, a child born in Delhi or Tanjore, by default learns about the place that he or she was born in and lives in. If I'm born in Madras, I wouldn't be able to read anything about Madras in my history textbooks. Consequently, people do not know anything about the places they live in. So we started a Facebook group, in the sense that local history is what can tell you about your own town. Local history is very free. It doesn't have barriers. You don't have to read about your kings or the dates or the wars, which really made you disinterested in history in the first place. So you can learn about your grandfather. You can learn about the road. You can learn about the museum. You can learn about the river. So we started a Facebook group with the Cooum as an excuse to learn about the city that we love. We thought our 10 or 20 people would join, but 1,500 people joined the group. And soon we were searching the archives, books, old photographs, newspapers for any information on the Cooum. We divided the Cooum into the rural and the urban part. We had trips in the rural areas and heritage walks in the urban sections. This was when the Cooum flooded in 2015. We were crowdsourcing details about Madras and the rivers. The astounding aspect of crowdsourcing, we came across an example. Two individuals, M.G. Ramachandran and M.S. Subbulakshmi, who had nothing in common except that they had lived on the banks of the river Adayar, which is the sister river of the Cooum. And then somebody crops up with this news that they were both born in the same year, both had got Bharat Ratnas, which is the highest possible award for a civilian in India, and both had acted in the movie Meera. While MS acted as the heroine, MGR acted as an extra. But what we get from this is, the takeaway is, Meera is the only movie in which two Bharat Ratnas have acted. Walking along the 72 kilometers of the Cooum, we came across so much of truth that the river was almost speaking to us. What we visualized as a month-long project became 2 years of projects. We came across many facts. We looked into the future and the stinking present, and many hitherto unpublished facts about the Cooum. There are 4 temples on the banks of the Cooum, which have been mentioned in Devaram, the Shaivite text of the 7th century. There's also a mythology which makes Cooum a holy river. Shiva is Nadipriya, the lover of rivers, in Tamil text. Shiva wields a bow to burn the Tripuram rather than a trident, and when the bow strikes the ground, a spring of water emerges, and that is the Cooum. So if next time you cross Cooum, you better say your prayers. For a country with so much of aviation mythology, every alternate day you get a WhatsApp that we invented flying. So we wonder where the first plane in Madras or India or Asia flew. It was just 4 years after the Wright brothers flew their first plane in Kitty Hawk. A baker from Corsica called De Angelis, Corsica is an island in the Mediterranean, he rigs up a plane and demonstrates it in the island and the Cooum. So the first plane in Asia flew right in the middle of the Cooum. There was a French nobleman who lived in a 6x6 jail beside the Cooum in Fort St. George because there was no money in his family back in Paris to ransom him out. He was a prisoner who had been captured in Pondicherry and he was in this jail. After 3 years, Bernadotte goes back to Paris, and at that time the Swedish royal family does not have a heir. They want a noble man to become the next king. So he is chosen. So a man who was a prisoner next to the Cooum, his grandchildren still rule Sweden. The British loved Madras as they would love London. They loved the Cooum as they would love the Thames. They put all their best buildings on its banks. The Indo-Saracenic architecture started on the banks of the Cooum and spread all over to India. It was an amalgam of Muslim, Hindu, and British architecture. It was for a competition that the Senate House was built, the first architecture competition in India, perhaps Asia even. The prize was 3,000 rupees and there were 17 entries. Robert Chisholm actually won the prize to build the Senate House in University. The Victoria Public Hall, where a lot of theatre in Madras started. Shakespeare was speaking in Tamil in the Victoria Public Hall. Romeo Juliet became Jwalita Ramanan. Every drama of Shakespeare was converted into Tamil and played on the banks of the Cooum in Victoria Public Hall. And of course, the Madras Medical College, also an Indo-Saracenic building, but more important because it was one of the earliest colleges, medical colleges in the world to admit women. The man who started this museum, Balfour, was also the person who admitted women there. Women by the boatloads came from Europe to study their medicine in Madras because their countries would not allow women to study their MBBS degrees there. The East India Company College, which the British started to teach their staff Telugu, Tamil and Urdu. That is where the Tirukkural was translated. That is where the Dravidian group of languages was also identified. The Madras Literary Society is the oldest lending library in the country, which is the only surviving part of the college road. Florence Nightingale, of course, mentions in one of her texts that the Cooum is a nauseous river which gives up the vapors of disease. She was never to Madras, she had never been to Madras, but she said this. And the local presidency government panicked and wanted to stop the Cooum, wanted to fill the Cooum at Spur Tank Road. Luckily, better sense prevailed and the Cooum was saved for history. This is a postcard, the savory Cooum it says, a postcard from Madras with people holding their noses. So the question comes again, is the Cooum dead? I would say yes. And if I ask you why the Cooum is dead, 90% of you would invariably answer drainage. And you couldn't be more wrong. Now recall the Cooum water that I told you was being kept outside. Madras survives on Cooum water to quench its thirst. 1/3 of the water coming into Madras through our taps comes from the Cooum. This is the Kesavaram Dam, which was built at the starting of the Cooum to divert the waters into the Pundi Lake. So the Cooum water is going into the Pundi Lake, and this river effectively kills the Cooum. No water comes into the Cooum for the last 70 years. And we talk about the Cooum and drainage and how the drainage has killed the Cooum. The politicians will tell you that boating is possible on the Cooum and money can be spent on this. It is not possible. There is not enough water to quench your thirst and save the Cooum also. The encroachments must be removed from the sides of the Cooum. The government, the highway, the poor, the rich, everybody encroaches on the Cooum. They have to be cleared. This is a baby canal. A baby canal in the middle of the Cooum can at least keep the water moving and stop its stagnation. The baby canals are very popular abroad. And of course, sewerage has to be treated before being left inside the Cooum. So the exercise that we are undertaking is, if we know her better, we will treat her better. How many of you would accept if we took a garbage load and dumped it on the Taj Mahal? We wouldn't, because we know its historical value. The moment we start realizing how important Cooum was in history, we would also stop dirtying her. We have to have a set of actions and be responsible for it, so that the Cooum survives in history and the Cooum survives for our children. Thank you and good night.